Hi all. In this video we're going to see about the properties of smooth muscle. So properties of smooth muscle and properties of skeletal muscle are two important questions that can be asked from muscle physiology. Though the concept is simple, the students tend to forget the different points that are present in both. So make sure you make a mnemonic while learning both these properties. Okay. So let's start. So here I've enumerated 10 properties of smooth muscle. Let's see each one by one. We've got morphological properties, excitability, contractility, conductivity, tone, plasticity, large phenomenon, then rhythmicity, length tension relationship, and force velocity relationship. So now let's see each point one by one. First we'll see the morphological characteristics. So in the smooth muscle, when compared to the skeletal muscle, we know that there are no striations. The contractile elements are actin and myosin, but we don't have any troponin here. There are no T tubules. There are no well-developed neuromuscular junctions. So these are some of the important morphological differences when compared to the skeletal muscle. Here, in this case, the arrangement of actin and myosin is different. We've got dense bodies here, and the direction of contraction is different. So morphologically, the smooth muscle is different when compared to the skeletal and cardiac muscle. Next, we'll move on to the next point, excitability. So we know that just like skeletal muscle, the smooth muscle is also excitable. What do you mean by the term excitability? It is the ability to respond to a variety of stimuli by producing an electrical change in the membrane potential. So when you give a stimulus, the muscle will respond. That is meant by excitability. So smooth muscles can be excited by various stimuli. It can be the nervous stimuli, it can be circulating hormones, chemicals, or even stretch of the muscle can produce a response in smooth muscles. So the stimuli include nervous, chemical, mechanical, as well as electrical. All these different types of stimuli can produce a response in smooth muscle. Next point is contractility. So as I said, when you give a stimulus to the muscle will respond. How does it respond? The smooth muscle can contract. So this ability to shorten and generate force when stimulated is known as contractility. So for smooth muscles, the difference between contractility property of smooth muscle and skeletal muscle is that the smooth muscles have got a latent period of around 100 to 200 milliseconds, and the contraction is also time is also more. So see, this is the graph which compares the contraction period of the skeletal, cardiac and the smooth muscle. So here you can see that the smooth muscle contraction is slower and more prolonged when compared to the skeletal and the cardiac. The relaxation also is very slow when compared to the skeletal and cardiac. So on the whole, we've got a prolonged and slow onset and offset of contraction of smooth muscle. Next point, conductivity. That means it has the ability to transmit excitation from one fiber to another. Now this is because we've got two types of smooth muscles. One is the multi-unit and other is the unitary. Now for multi-unit is almost similar to that of a skeletal muscle. We got for each muscle fiber we've got a separate innervation. But what about unitary? In unitary we've got gap junctions, and the stimuli is actually spread through these gap junctions so that this whole thing will work like a syncytium. So that is meant by conductivity. It can conduct the impulse to the other fibers. So see, in single unit smooth muscles we've got gap junction which helps the ions to pass between the cells. So they'll act like a syncytium. Whereas in multi-unit they are independently innervated. Now this one application of this conductivity is peristalsis. See, once a peristalsis begin at one part, it has to move down in a very coordinated fashion. Now this happens because they act like a syncytium. So conductivity is another property of smooth muscle. Next important um, property is tone. What do you mean by tone? It is the continuous partial state of contraction even at rest without fatigue. Now for smooth muscle, now this is an example of the defecation reflex. You know that even if the rectum is full and even if the internal sphincter opens, it is only when the external sphincter relaxes that defecation occurs. So see, the external sphincter has to remain in a contracted state for a long time. Okay, and it's only when the surroundings are favorable that the external sphincter open up, right? So that means that this external anal sphincter has to maintain a partial state of contraction without fatigue. It is always contracting. So this tone is a very important. Even though skeletal muscles have got a tone, the smooth muscle tone is more different than that of skeletal muscle. Here we've got different groups of muscle in different states of contraction. So this tone can be either myogenic due to the intrinsic ionic currents or neurogenic, and their physiological role is that first of all our vascular tone, we've got a vascular tone which helps to maintain a blood pressure. Always our arterioles and capillaries are in a state of contraction which helps to maintain the blood pressure. And similarly, as I said before, the sphincters, they are closed until it is required to relax. So they are two important um, examples. Another example is the lower esophageal sphincter, which prevents the acid reflux. So that is regarding the property of tone for smooth muscles. So next property is plasticity or stress relaxation response. So what do you mean by plasticity? The smooth muscles have got a unique property to adapt to stretch by resetting its length tension relationship so that the tension is always constant. I'll explain it with the help of an example. So suppose this is the stomach and it's empty right now. But suppose the stomach starts filling up. The tension inside the stomach would ideally increase, but that increase in tension is being negated by relaxation of the fundus. Okay, this is called receptive relaxation. The same thing happens in the urinary bladder also. As the bladder fills up, initially the tension increases, but then the actin and the myosin will reorganize themselves so that the tension remains constant, but the length actually increases so that the pressure inside can remain constant. So that is called plasticity. The mechanism is by reorganization of the actin myosin filaments and the cytoskeleton, which allows the muscle to accommodate the new length without sustained rise in pressure. So that is the unique property of smooth muscle, plasticity. So next we move on to another unique property of smooth muscle, which is latch bridge mechanism. So to understand latch bridge mechanism, we should first know how a smooth muscle contracts and relaxes. So suppose this is a smooth muscle. We know the smooth muscle contracts by means of calcium induced calcium release, which is basically release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. And this calcium in turn will activate enzymes that will phosphorylate the myosin head and thereby cause cross linkage formation between actin and myosin. Now how does this smooth muscle relax? The smooth muscle relaxes when this calcium levels drop. So how does the calcium level drop? For that we've got different types of pumps which cause the movement of calcium back to the source. For example, here we've got the calcium hydrogen exchanger which transports the calcium back to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Then we've got a calcium ATPase, and also here we've got a calcium sodium pump. So by these mechanisms, the amount of calcium within the cell would decrease. Now this will cause activation of another enzyme called myosin phosphatase, which dephosphorylates the myosin and thereby make it inactive so that it cannot attach to the actin. So then what is latch bridge mechanism? Here's the twist. Even though the myosin is inactive, some myosin will actually bind on to the actin. They won't detach from the actin so that a sustained contraction can be maintained. Now this is a lot, this requires a lot less energy because here ATPase is not involved. So this mechanism is called latch bridge mechanism, wherein the myosin filaments fail to detach from the actin and does not consume any energy. Okay, they basically latch on, and that is why it is called the latch bridge mechanism. So, what's the definition of large bridge mechanism? Is the ability to maintain the force of prolonged periods with minimal ATP consumption. The mechanism is, as I said before, initially calcium calmodulin activates the enzyme phosphorylase myosin light chain kinase and cross bridge formation occurs. When calcium level falls, it dephosphorylases myosin, but some myosin heads remain attached to the actin in a large state, and thereby the force is maintained with little energy use. The significance is especially in cases of blood vessels, sphincters, anywhere where prolonged contraction is required, this large bridge mechanism would come into play. So this is a unique feature of smooth muscles. Next, rhythmicity. Do smooth muscles have rhythmicity? We may think that it's only cardiac muscles that have rhythmicity, but smooth muscles also have the ability to contract in regular repeating pattern without external triggers. So what is a pacemaker here? Here it is called the interstitial cells of Kajal. They are the pacemakers of the gut. So interstitial cells of the Kajal, they have the ability to generate slow waves in membrane potential, and when a threshold is reached, an action potential can be triggered. A good example of this would be the peristaltic waves that are present in the intestine and the phasic contractions in the uterus. So thus smooth muscles also have rhythmicity, and the pacemakers are the interstitial cells of Kajal. Next property is length tension relationship. Now, when compared to the cardiac and the skeletal muscle, the length tension relationships of smooth muscle is different. Obviously, because it has got properties of plasticity and all. So here, basically, length tension relationship is the relationship between the initial muscle length and the force it can generate. But for smooth muscles, it's always variable and inconsistent. Initially, if there's a stretch, the tension would increase. But because of plasticity, when there is maintained stretch, the tension would decrease. And even if there is further stretch, the tension may not increase proportionately. And this is because of the oblique filament arrangement and the dense body anchoring instead of sarcomeres. So that is why for smooth muscles, the length tension relationship can be variable and inconsistent. And finally, the force velocity relationship. In skeletal muscles, also, we had talked about the force velocity relationship, where what the difference between or the relationship between the force of contraction and the force, muscle force, and the velocity. So, here also, the basic concept is the same. As the load increases, velocity of the shortening decreases. So the important feature in smooth muscle when compared to the skeletal muscle is that the contraction is more slower. So the curve for the force velocity relationship is much more flatter than in skeletal muscle due to the slower cross bridge cycling. So the examples are, suppose we have a high blood pressure. The arteries will constrict slowly against that increased pressure. Similarly, when in the GI segments, they shorten faster when moving with low resistance chyme than with high resistance chyme. So this is the application of force velocity relationship in case of smooth muscle. So it is basically the pattern is the same. Velocity of the shortening decreases as the load increases, but it is much slower when compared to the skeletal muscle. So that completes the 10 properties of smooth muscle: the morphological, excitability, contractility, conductivity, then tone, then plasticity, large bridge phenomenon, rhythmicity, length tension relationship, and force velocity relationship. So you can study this with the help of a mnemonic. You can rearrange these um, the properties as you want, but remember the important ones, the very important ones are the plasticity, the large bridge phenomenon and all. So make sure you don't miss that. So I hope this video was useful for you. Thank you.